What's up, Willowbrook? Today we're in Genesis 3, verses 1 through 5. Now, if you remember in chapter 2, God tells Adam and Eve that they're able to eat of the fruit of all the trees in the Garden of Eden except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But in our passage today, we read about the serpent tempting Eve in the garden. Now, we later find out that the serpent is Satan. But look at how he begins this temptation. In verse 1, he says, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" Now again, remember in the previous chapter, God said they were able to eat from all the trees except for one. So he begins by making Eve doubt what God really said after all. And then he goes on and he says to Eve, "You certainly won't die, for God knows that when you eat from that tree, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So basically, the serpent or Satan tried to make Eve doubt what God said and then tried to make Eve think that God really wasn't good after all. That God was trying to just keep her and Adam in a cage. He didn't want them to be like God. He wanted them to not be able to live their best life in a sense. And you know, this is exactly what Satan does. He tries to make us question the words of God. We actually read about another instance of this happening later on in the New Testament as Jesus is tempted by Satan in the book of Matthew. Now in chapter 3, Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River and he comes out of the water and there's a voice from heaven. It says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." So God is saying, "This is my son." And then in chapter 4, when Jesus is in the wilderness and Satan approaches him, how does he start the temptation? He starts by saying, "If you're the Son of God." If you're the Son of God. He wants Jesus to doubt what God said. And you know, Jesus calls Satan the father of lies. That's what he does. He lies. Every word from his mouth is a lie. And the enemy will try to tempt us the same way today that he did with Eve, that he did with Jesus. He'll try to make us doubt what God said. He'll try to make us doubt the goodness of God. So how do we combat that? How do we combat the lies of the enemy and not be led astray and not be tempted to where we sin against God? Well, we follow the lead of Jesus. In Matthew 4, every time Jesus responds to the enemy, he responds with Scripture. He responds by quoting Scripture. So we combat the lies with the truth of Scripture. So with that in mind, this year, we want to invite you to keep reading Scripture with us daily, to keep reading and studying and knowing what this says. So the day that the enemy comes to you and tries to make you question what God really said, or tries to make you question if God really is good, you can combat those lies with what's true, with Scripture. I pray that God blesses you today, and we will see you next time.